is Subject to Interpretation, a podcast which takes us deep into the topics that matter to professional interpreters. I'm your host, Maria Ceballos Wallis. Today we're going to speak with Technophile, Carlos Solis, who is a co-founder and director of technology of Universe Language Solutions, one of the largest conference interpretation, equipment, technology, and technical services companies in the United States. And he's going to review with us the latest trends in technology for interpreters and walk us through the basic elements required to set up your own cutting-edge home interpreting studio. Welcome, Carlos.
Thank you, Maria. Hi, how are you?
I am well. Thank you very much for joining us today. So notice that I called you a technophile, and that sounds like a really big word, but according to the Oxford
Yes.
Dictionary, it means a person who is enthusiastic about new technology.
Well,
Is that
that applies. Yes, I agree. It might sound like a big word, but it applies. Thank you for having me.
absolutely? It's good to have you here. So when some people think about technology, they think about big words, they think about complicated equipment, they think about a steep learning curve in terms of becoming familiar with and using equipment. Is that how you see it?
Well, it's the way technology works is, of course, gives you all the options, and sometimes it does scare you a little bit. So the way I would see it is be open to anything. Mostly nowadays, that technology is in our hands for us to use. So don't be afraid.
But to those interpreters who are out there who might be used to working in person and who now have had to adapt to the new times, working remotely, and who might also have to adapt to new ways of working when they return to the hospitals, the courtrooms, the boardrooms, and any other environment that they'll be interpreting in. What words of wisdom do you have in terms of working their way into technology if they have not done so already?
Okay, one thing that I could say is something very similar that a colleague interpreter told me once about simultaneous interpretation. To avoid that moment of panic or the possibility of stage fright, think about this. He said, "Okay, you're telling a tale, so you're actually helping those people that are listening to you out there, so you're helping them to convey the message that that person on the microphone is saying. So the same way I would say, use technology. Technology is there for you to convey a message. So it's just a channel, a platform that you need to use as a way to convey the message. Again, you're the messenger. Try to maintain that thought that you're trying to help. And most of the times, interpreters have that mentality to help others. So keep that in mind.
And so today we've brought you here so that you can talk to us a little bit about some ways that those interpreters who are either already using technology can improve the way that they are using and adapting their technology, and how those interpreters who might be a little reticent or who might be a little gun shy can get their feet wet. So let's move on to a little bit of techie talk. We are obviously doing this podcast through Zoom. So, presumably, for many people, learning about the remote teleconferencing platforms would be a very, very, very good first step. But just having access to a platform does not guarantee that you're going to have a good quality signal, good quality audio. Let's
Right.
start talking about the basic elements that you would need to create your home studio.
Okay, well, whatever you have available, of course, choose the best option for whatever you have. For example, it might look right here that what I'm using is something that might not be the best professional option, but you're hearing okay, and this is something that I wanted to let you know, and basically kind of on purpose confirm that even something that is not professional, as long as you do your homework, it will work fine.
And Carlos, for our listeners who are actually listening to the podcast version, you're using a simple wired headphones or ear pods that you would get with a telephone. Is that right?
That's right. That wired uh, earbuds for your iPhone, or smart device. So that's what I'm using with the microphone in the line in one of the wires, with volume control, and they sound pretty good. They have a decent sound. Of course, the ones you're using are superior quality. Yeah, I would say it's getting to the studio quality, and you can go. There's no limit. So the one thing that I would say is, make sure that you do your homework about all the specifications. But sometimes specifications might just um, give you a hard time, and you might say, oh yeah, it might intimidate you. um, do that to a certain extent, making sure that that's what you need. But at the same time, sometimes you can just work around the fact that you might not need to get the most expensive pair of headphone, microphone headset. If we're starting to talk about the parts, the technical equipment that you use. So I would start, and one of the most important things is the microphone headset you use. Sometimes you are able to minimize the potential issues with just by using a foam cover, one of the, like a little cover for the microphone tip, instead of just going straight to buying a very expensive microphone. You can do it with a decent kind of middle of the road type of microphone headset, as long as, like I said, you cover those put areas of potential issues, which is the microphone that sometimes might pick up like those popping noises with the P's and the B's and the M's, and will exacerbate those sounds and make it more saturated. But if you use a foam cover, a pop, kind of a pop filter for your microphone, not necessarily the pop filter, the standalone studio type. It's just something that covers the tip of a microphone.
Now, as far as headphones or headsets are concerned, some people prefer those with two speakers or two in-ear speakers, and some people prefer one. What do you recommend for interpreters?
My personal preference is having two. But I know, like you said, some people prefer just one for them. So I don't know, for some reason, some people need to have that idea, that feeling that they need to hear their voice out in the air, not necessarily be isolated. So again, it all depends also of what type of headphones you're using. Sometimes you have the ear cups that are actually isolating your ears completely. Yours are kind of in the middle, but some of them are just sitting there, not necessarily covering your ears, and you kind of can hear something in the environment that you're working with. But my preference is two, so yeah, I have like complete isolation of the sound that I'm getting.
So we've covered the filter, we've covered the microphone, we've covered the possibility of having one or two. Um, I guess there's small speakers that are in your ears, which is really a question of preference. And I also think it's a question of depending on the environment that you're in, whether you're listening, whether if you're using some equipment in a courtroom or if you're using equipment in a very quiet room.
Yes, and talking about quiet and the earphone, there's something very, very curious, a very curious detail that interpreters and people in general that are using this type of communication with microphones and headsets and Zoom and all that. It's interesting, but you have to be very careful about the sound. And let me say this: it happens more with people that have like some type of hearing problem. So the more hearing problem they have, their tendency is to use a louder volume, right? So it's tricky, but sometimes what happens is that the louder you hear, and depending on, on the type of microphone, headphones, the actual earphones that you have, sometimes the volume, actually the sound that is coming out of those headphones is picked up when it's too loud. Is picked up by the microphone that is right next to your mouth. So something you have to be careful that because the louder they are, of course, the more possibility the microphone for pick it up.
Now regarding the microphone as well, another recommendation that I've heard is about an inline mute button.
Yes, definitely. It helps a lot because sometimes when you are, it's a lot better when you are in the in those dire moments. Sometimes you need to mute yourself for whatever reason. You're at home, a dog barking or something. Even though you have made all your preparations, you have your studio and all that. But something, sometimes you can never prevent everything. So it's a lot better, a lot easier to go to your line and mute it right there, whatever the microphone line is, to mute your microphone. Another very, very good point, and I haven't mentioned, is the noise canceling feature. Noise canceling feature is essential because you never know what can be, a phone ringing, a door barking, a doorbell, and so on. And you know how many possibilities you can find.
Absolutely, Carlos. So I'm really glad we started with a headset, or the headset, talking about that, because what's interesting about the headset is that it is one of those bits of equipment for the interpreter that an interpreter should probably carry with them everywhere they go and wherever they are. If they are working, you never know when you're going to be handed a receiver, a transceiver, or anything else, and you might want to use the equipment that you are familiar with in terms of your the fit, in terms of your familiarity with it, and especially now with COVID times, it's probably okay to plug your headphones into a piece of equipment, but you're probably going to feel a lot more comfortable if you bring your own headset, since this is something that you are going to personally be using in your on your body.
I absolutely agree. Yes, that is the best way.
But moving on, so we've got our headset, and that's, I guess, our our most easily accessible portable piece of equipment for an interpreter. But let's move into the office. Internet is really is having a fast internet is key, isn't it?
It is definitely. I know I had said the word essential when it comes to the microphone, but the microphone, of course, is connected to the computer. But for your whole operation, the I would say, and everybody can see this very easily, the most critical point for your presence in whatever method you're using online, for your online presence, is the internet. So you have to make sure that you are using a very robust internet connection, whether it's Wi-Fi or wired connection, meaning if you're connected by an Ethernet cable, which is always the best recommendation. But it doesn't mean that if if your best option is to use Wi-Fi instead of like a long Ethernet cable going through your kitchen and going to, in a way that you cannot hide it, or it's going to be even a hazard or an eyesore. You can use. There's a myth. It's a very big myth that, oh, Wi-Fi, it's really dangerous. Okay, yes, anything could happen at any point. If you lose internet altogether, even the Ethernet cable is not going to be able to do anything. But if you have a very robust internet connection, you should be fine. You have to follow some critical rules of thumb that will allow you to have the best uninterrupted connection. Meaning you have to make sure, of course, that you are close or closer to the router, if possible, when as much as possible. And if you use more than one connection, if your network, or if you have more than one network at home, or from, at the location where you're working from, you make sure that you're the only one using that network, that connection, as much as possible.
Well, unfortunately, in this day and age, with children having to stay home and studying at home, I remember the first thing that I did when we were on at the beginning of this lockdown was I increased the speed of my internet so that I could at least have a little bit of a safety net, I felt. What do you recommend in terms of speeds for megabytes per second? What would be a good range for somebody to be paying for in terms of service?
It's commonly recommended to have at least 85 megabytes, but it's again, it's funny because I have been able to confirm, as long as, again, everything is relative. As long as you are the only one using that connection, you don't necessarily have 10, 12 people connected to the same thing, or maybe one or two that are gaming at the same time that you are using your internet connection. Of course, that's going to make a big difference. But let's say if you know that at least for the time being, that you're going to be using the internet connection for your Zoom purposes or for your interpretation purposes online, I have confirmed, I have verified that 25 megs is more than enough. Again, following the same procedures as much as possible, getting closer to the router helps a lot. And you have to watch the type of connection you have as well, because sometimes there's a little misconception about the how stable a signal might be. Some people might think, okay, yeah, they told me in that my cable service provider told me that I can have 2.5 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz connections, and they told me that the 5 gigahertz is the most robust connection. Yes, that is true, but you have to be careful about the 2.4 versus 5 gigahertz, because 2.4, even though it's less robust, in principle of than the 5, the 5 doesn't travel, as far as the 2.4 does. So you have to make sure that if you're using a 5, which is, yes, it is the most robust, the most stable, is the larger broadband connection, but try to be as close as possible to the router when you're working. That would be important.
It's always good to do a test run
Definitely.
with whatever client is hiring you, with your friends and family, to make sure that the equipment you're working with is functioning the way you'd like it to, and also to make sure that you know how to use the equipment in many different types of situations. So let's talk about the webcam. A lot of computers now, pretty much every computer now, comes in with an integrated webcam. Is that enough?
As long as the webcam is from the computer that is relatively new, that should be enough, because I am not a particular fan of external webcams. Of course, my preference is the built-in cameras, but as long as you have decent, a recent model of your laptop or computer is a recent model, that more than likely is going to have a good camera. But at the same time, if you have a computer that either doesn't have the webcam built in, or for some reason is not good enough, you can always connect, of course, a camera and an external camera through your USB connections. But again, you try to use the best option, because you don't want to have like a grainy image and very opaque image.
And speaking of computers, it seems to vary between a Mac or a PC, depending what kind of computer a person have. Each type of computer has its own I guess, pre-settings perhaps that we have to keep in mind, right?
Yes, absolutely. Um, think about this way. It depends on what works best for you, because I don't like to say, okay, these are the best or those are the best. It's the same way when you get a cold. Of course, I'm not talking about Corona, but people tell you, yeah, drink that, take that. That is good for that. It all depends. Same way as your body takes some things better than other people. Same way with computers. One size does not fit all. So one of the best things that I would tell you, keeping in mind the differences between Windows computers and Apple computers. Um, think about what you like to do or how you like to do things regarding the settings. Apple products tend to be more kind of a preset type of configuration. Gives you very limited options for you to play with, as opposed to Windows computers that have more than plenty options for you to play with, and for you to change the different configurations and settings, which might be overwhelming for some people. So depending on how you are, if you are the ones, if you're, first of all, if you're very good, somewhat savvy with settings and computers, okay. If you like to play with those options, that might, Windows computer might be the best option for you. Some other people might prefer to have some preset, kind of a more of a turnkey type of settings
And
to
so
have.
that might be a good point for folks who are just getting into starting to work with technology, for them to consider whether or not a Windows PC versus an Apple PC works for them, depending on the amount of time and investment they want to give to learning all the different particularities and specifying the settings that they want for the computer.
Correct. And also something else that I didn't mention in the previous details we were discussing. As far as the internet connection at home, which is the primary location that most of interpreters are at, one very high recommendation that I will mention is to get a mesh extending a mesh extender system, a Wi-Fi extender. They have been having those for a long while, but lately the specific system that has been very popular and is very efficient is a mesh uh, type of system for your Wi-Fi extender, and that's very easy to set up, and it works great. And really, they have like different brands and all that, but as long as you get a mesh system, that works very well.
And that makes it a lot easier for folks who are working from home. If you have two people working from home and perhaps children also taking classes, it makes it a lot easier for the signal to be spread out throughout the house, and there being less interference. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
but actually, you're able to use a specific location, and you would notice that certain parts of the house where the signal didn't get to reach before, um, you know, it would, the mesh system will allow you to use certain rooms or something that in the past it was just not an option.
Okay, thank you for that tip. That's really helpful. So now once you've got your internet, your headset, your webcam, your computer, and you got everything set up, then you have to find a nice quiet place. Is the kitchen table ideal, do you think, or maybe?
No, not well. It depends. If it's a person that doesn't cook, it's going to be the best, of course. But if you're talking in of course a high activity, high traffic area, of course the kitchen might be very dangerous. All those pots and pans and water faucets being turned on, and people having meals. That might be sometimes. I don't know, depending on how many rooms you have available. Sometimes, okay, it might be a little bit more challenging. But I have heard people that whenever they have, they have been very limited as far as rooms to use. Sometimes they have been in a closet.
Wow.
It's perfect. So they, of course, as long
The
as they
acoustics in a
fit
closet are
well,
wonderful, aren't
are
they?
wonderful. People have recorded musical productions and like the music CD, EPs and LPs and albums and all that in a closet. One of my nieces have. But anyway, so that's a if you're in a very difficult situation, finding an appropriate room, a closet is the option.
So in terms of environment, we have to be concerned with sound. We have to be concerned with traffic, high traffic areas, maybe dogs, cats, telephones, etc. But we also should be concerned a little bit with our background, right?
Yes, and it's something that you have to be careful is what's in the back. You don't want anything busy that is going to that is going to distract the people that you're communicating with. Of course, if you're in the simultaneous interpretation assignment, more than likely your image is not going to be broadcasted. So as long as you are, if you don't use it, of course, there's no concern. But if you're a lot in Zoom meetings and the like, you have to make sure that you maintain a neutral background, or if not, if you don't have it, you have a couple of options. You can get either a virtual background like the one you have, subject to interpretation, which is very good, very neutral, is not busy, something like that. Or you can also use some type of backdrop right behind you, like a physical backdrop. Some people use those room dividers, type of cubicle type of dividers. They tend to be more expensive than a backdrop, but I would definitely recommend a backdrop, a physical backdrop, if that's an option for you.
And if you need to have if you need to have an actual background, then I highly recommend that folks get a green screen, blue screen, which is very inexpensive. It's on, you can get a 4x6 one for about $30 or something like that. And those are really good because basically it isolates the colors,
Yes,
and you don't have the bleed that happens when you don't have a green screen and you're just using the background.
that is correct. Yes.
So, Carlos, we have the elements that we need for our home office, our home studio. We are doing the best we can with that and to try and maintain a normal work life. But in a couple of months, we hope to be able to go back to in-person proceedings, and that includes schools, that includes courts, depositions, hospitals, any setting in which interpretation might be needed. We also talked a little bit about portable interpreting equipment. This is something we've used in the past, but for those who haven't used it, tell us what that is and how we can avail ourselves of that for the next stage of this pandemic.
That's a very good question. Portable interpretation equipment is very useful these days. And the types that you can find, you can get, let's say, an FM system. Some people call it RF system. A portable system in which the communication is mainly one way. So you have a portable transmitter, typically the one that the interpreter carries, or sometimes the leader of the group uses to address a group of people. So that would be the basic portable FM system, in which one transmitter talks to a certain number, more than most of the times, unlimited number of listeners, but again, one way. The other option is that is now very popular is the two-way system, which is usually a digital RF system. So that digital RF system, it's kind of the same principle. One, and these cases is not called transmitter, but it's called transceiver, because those devices are now transmitter, the combination of transmitter and a receiver in the same device. So for practical purposes, the interpreter uses the same type of concept. So speaking to a microphone connected to that device that the interpreter carries, and that is a transceiver that you can send the signal or the voice to other receivers or other transceivers. And that might be a little bit confusing for some people, but you have a way to send the voice either one way or two way if you're using a group of transceivers within the same system.
And what's really important about that is that in the past, we were only able to use one-way systems, which meant that if we were using this for interpreting purposes, the interpreter would interpret, the other person would listen, but they had to respond out loud, or they had a very loud voice, or the interpreter had to be close to them in order to be able to hear what they were saying in case the interpreter had to interpret back what they were saying. Now, by using a transceivers, we can jump that step, can't we? The interpreter does no longer have to be right next to the person that they are interpreting for.
That is correct. And another important point is that the interpreter doesn't have to do it consecutively, which it had to be the way that, to do it without having a system that allows the two-way communication. Now it does. You can keep the simultaneous interpretation mode. You can keep the simultaneous mode. And like you said it, yes, you don't have to be right next to the person, because you can be anywhere in the room within range to be able to hear not just one person, but any person using a transceiver. And everybody in the group is able to hear that person.
Now, I want to make a quick parenthesis to tell you about an interesting workaround that a friend of mine did in court towards the beginning of the pandemic. She did not have equipment. The court did not have equipment. And in order to safeguard her health and the safety of everybody, what she ended up doing was she ended up interpreting over the phone in person. In other words, she, in her cell phone, dialed the person. She got permission from the judge to allow her to dial the person who was there, and she was 6 or more feet apart, still observing, but she was able to communicate with that person, sort of obviously a two-way communication transceiver, right, but right, using the mobile phone that was available there.
That is amazing. Of course, the creativity that some people have, and that is a very good way to work around it. And that is the same principle exactly. So these devices, the digital two-way communication devices, do exactly what the phones do. And in this way, in this case, anyone in the courtroom or the location where the interpreter is working is able to use one of these.
So now that we have to be more creative than ever before, what other ways do you think that this technology can help us, can help court systems, meetings, schools get back to a little bit of sense of normalcy?
Any way you can think about this, any way where you have a group of people listening to one or more persons, you can have a way to give every one of those people in the room or in the facility or in the location one of these devices. And the beauty of that is not only they can hear at certain distance what the person or persons are saying, but they are also able to participate. They're able to interact and use one of those devices to ask questions, to make comments, to participate. And whether that is in a school setting, like a parent-teacher conference, or in a courtroom, or legal deposition, some interpreters are also using this mode as well, where you have the legal deposition in the law firm conference table, and they're connected to a Zoom meeting with the courtroom for the legal proceedings. And in addition to that, you're maintaining the social distancing by using technology. So the interpreter is not risking himself or herself, and is not putting anyone else at risk by, again, taking advantage of what the technology allows us to do now. So you can be in a courtroom or in a law firm, like I said, using these transceivers to communicate with each other at certain distance.
And that's really, really important, because what we call the hybrid mode in interpreting, in the sense that from now on, we're always going to have parties that are in different locations. It's going to be far more acceptable to interview a witness via Zoom, or it's going to be so a party's not going to be able to attend in person because they're traveling and they can't come, so they'll be received by Zoom. But at the same time, we'll have, like you said, an attorney and perhaps a deponent and an interpreter in one room, and yet we can't all be clustered together like we were before. So this is really, really creative and really important. What do you say to interpreters who are saying, well, this is all very nice, but my court system doesn't provide it, and I'm envisioning, thousands of dollars worth of equipment here?
Well, it all depends on what their means are. They can find some creative ways to get some alternative options price-wise with those type of equipment, and sometimes a combination of whatever the court provides, or even if the court doesn't provide the equipment. Let me say this, and I have been able to confirm this. Some interpreters have been called more frequently because they are able to offer equipment that the court doesn't have. So it's kind of a really big advantage for the interpreters that offer these sets of equipment to court, because that's what the court is looking for, to know who, not only the interpreter, whose interpreter is not only the best option skill wise, but also someone that can provide some additional tools that are efficient for the legal process.
So as a starter kit, what would you recommend to an interpreter who's interested in getting a starter kit?
A starter kit would be, it would be good by having an FM system, basic system. I don't know, anywhere between 2 and 5 receivers, of course, with a transmitter. But that works fine as long as you have a stable, a very reliable system. It doesn't have to be the latest model. If you find one that is from a previous generation or model, as long as it's from a reliable brand, that will do it. And it doesn't have to break the bank with one of these digital two-way communication systems like we were mentioning before. But of course, if you have a way to get one of those two, that would be the best.
So Carlos, is it absolutely necessary for interpreters to invest in the latest cutting edge technology as far as their personal interpreting equipment?
Yeah, not really. And I know, some people might be inclined to get the latest technology. Of course, that depends on the personality. But it's not really necessary. For example, my personal preference is, instead of you buying a less expensive system that, nowadays you find them online and they're popping up like bunnies. So they, instead of them getting a new system that is not going to last, long, my personal preference is to get a more reputable brand, a more reliable brand, even though maybe the system is not the latest model, the latest technology. But it works. It doesn't mean that it's not, that if it's just it's not the latest model, it doesn't mean that it's not going to work. So that is a better investment, in my opinion.
And yeah, go ahead.
Yes. No, what I was going to say is you can use different options as far as, headsets, as long as you have a 3.5 millimeter for those portable systems. And you can use, depending on the brand that you chose, you can actually use any of the ones that you use with the computer. And that's the flexibility, that if you have a portable system, you can use the same headset that you use on the computer.
So you don't have to double up and buy extra equipment that you're only going to use in certain situations.
Exactly. You can just use the same one, or maybe having two headsets, one as a backup, but you're using both for both type of systems, for your computer connection and for your portable system. And that's one thing that I would like to mention as well, that you don't have to use, nowadays you see a lot of recommendations about USB connectors for your headset, for your microphone headset. And yes, that is true. It has some, mostly advantages, but it's not everything about advantages. You can also have some disadvantages, which this is one of them. A USB system, a USB microphone headset, you're not able to use that for, with a portable system. However, you can use your 3.5 millimeter or the regular plug, some people call it the mini plug, um, with your computer as well as with your portable system.
And there's also an adapter that you can use to adapt that headset to a USB. Isn't that right?
Correct. An adapter that allows you to connect the two plugs, the typical two plugs from your headset into that adapter. So it has two female connectors and one USB connector that goes into the computer. That is really practical, and you're good to go with something like that.
So Carlos, summing it up for us, what are the main points that you want us to remember regarding starting that home office and working and selecting our equipment?
Okay, mainly the Wi-Fi connection, or internet connection, whether it's Wi-Fi or Ethernet. Pay a lot of attention to the quality, even though it doesn't have to be the most expensive microphone headset. Use a kind of a middle of the road. That's my preference. Not the cheapest one, not the most expensive one. If you go in the middle, is usually a good balance. And keep in mind that technology is for us to use, not for the technology to give us panic attacks.
Carlos, if any of our listeners or viewers have any questions regarding some of the things you've spoken about today, where can they reach out to you?
Sure, they can reach me at the main email address for the office, which is info@universelanguage.com. universelanguage.com.
And to all our viewers and listeners, thank you so very much for joining us. We hope that this podcast has enriched your journey along this fascinating field of interpretation. If you're watching this on YouTube, please share your comments with us below. And if you're listening to us, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our weekly episodes. Join us next week when we find out what it's like to interpret for live media events and breaking news. We'll speak with Carola Lehmacher. She's a Spanish, English, German, and French conference and diplomatic interpreter whose voice you may have heard interpreting for presidents, prime ministers, and political candidates.